dozens of American birds are being renamed to avoid glorifying slave owners and Confederate generals. I'm being serious here. The American Ornithological Society says it has found more than 100 species that will need to be renamed in a bid to be less exclusionary and harmful.
So harmful, so harmful. Now, that's as in the UK, Lord's Cricket Ground has been under pressure to rename the Warner Stand. It was named after Pelham Plum Warner, who was a Middlesex and England captain and whose ancestors had, guess what, owned slaves. Plum himself never owned any, as he was born 40 years after Britain abolished slavery.
You can't make this stuff up, can you? Joining us now is Nick Buckley, who's an independent candidate for Mayor of Greater Manchester. Thanks for joining us, Nick. I mean, look, you know, nobody approves of the slave trade, nobody approves of slavery, but this was a long, long time ago. Now, all due respect to the American Ornithological Society, Association, whatever they're called, but haven't they got anything better to do than to form committees to find out whether or not birds named after Confederate generals might have to be renamed? I mean, my advice to these people is get a life.
This is just pure virtue signalling, isn't it? It's white middle-class Americans sat round a table going, oh, we don't want people thinking we're racist. What can we do? Let's start renaming birds, because most of our problems in the inner cities in America is all to do with birds having the wrong name.
I mean, it strikes me, actually, that very few people would even know that these birds exist. They're kind of niche birds, aren't they? They're not your sort of robins on a Christmas card. They're sort of like your little micro subspecies. So most people won't know they exist, let alone know who they're named after, let alone the history or ancestry of the person they're named after. I think there's only one person in the world who finds these birds to be racist, and that's the person who wrote this recommendation.
Absolutely. And where does this stop? Let me tell you what upsets me the most, and that's the Garibaldi biscuit. The Garibaldi biscuit was named after the Italian general who went to Brazil to fight the Ragamuffin Wars. And what he did to those ragamuffins, every time I bite that biscuit now, I get upset. I think of all those ragamuffins who were persecuted. So in my household now, we don't call them Garibaldi biscuits. We call them Huffy Fluffies, because that offends nobody.
You're not being serious, are you, Nick? You're being facetious. No. It is such a ridiculous thing. I mean, if you talk about these people's links to slavery, they're pretty slim. I mean, they're not exactly dyed-in-the-wool slave traders. And you're talking, aren't you, Alex, about birds that people have never heard of. Right. There's one named after James John Audubon, who was a famous American naturalist and wildlife illustrator. It was called the Audubon bird. And he had harmful attitudes, apparently, according to the American Ornithological Society, towards black and indigenous people. And the decision to rename this bird was taken after a lengthy process to examine its name and the personal history of the person it was named after. Let me just read to you what the American Ornithological Society said about all of this nonsense. The committee will broaden participation by including a diverse representation of individuals with expertise in the social sciences, communications, ornithology and taxonomy. I mean, you know, what is this nonsense? What are they talking about? Who are these people? It's just ridiculous.
These are classic first world problems. Because we haven't got really any problems left in society, we're having to make them up for something to tackle, for something to complain about. But on the other side, there is problems out there that we should be tackling, but we're spending far too much time on this nonsense. I mean, really, I shouldn't be here talking about this. You shouldn't be talking about this. There's other things we should be talking about. But for someone to get attention now in our society, all they have to do is accuse something or someone of being racist. And it still grabs the headlines. It's not got the power it used to have, but it still has some power.
Don't forget, Nick, that people are persecuted because their ancestors had something to do with slavery or the
Everyone's
slave
probably
trade.
got ancestors. You go back long enough.
How can you blame me? How can you blame me if my great grandfather was something to do with the slave trade? That's not my fault. And yet, under this new orthodoxy, this woke orthodoxy, it is my fault and I should be punished. That's absurd.
It's extremely unfair to persecute the son, the relatives of someone from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Like you said, you've had nothing to do with the slave trade, but if they can find something in your great granddad's history, then you're right then for persecution. That's not fair on any metric we use.
Yeah, I mean, we laugh about this stuff, but actually it just creates more division in society. And frankly, I think it's an insult to ethnic minorities that they should have such fragile sensitivities. I am sure they don't. I mean, it's absolutely balmy. And, we do laugh about it, but at the end of the day, it takes up,
it's
it hoovers
pernicious.
up a lot of
it's
time.
Pernicious. It's
and
the scourge of our time.
It silos people. It turns us into a tribal society.
It's the scourge of our time.
Increases racism easily.
Absolutely.
And don't forget, we have bonfire night coming in a couple of days. And bonfire night upsets me every year because somebody will light a Roman candle.
Not
Nick,
that.
We've got to stop you there. We're out of time,
Right.
sadly. Sorry to cut off Nick there, but we have come to the end of the show.